And the floor is yours, Senator. This is SB X16. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Senator Bell, Chairman, and making my point, actually, in the last hearing of the last two bills, reducing greenhouse gases by 2020 and looking at ways we can do that. SB 6 does one simple thing. It's narrower than Senator Huff's bill. It ensures AB 32, the California Global Warming Solutions Act, has a better chance of meeting its goal by reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020, and it redirects the funds from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund slated to be used for exclusively high-speed rail to the California Transportation Commission. The redirected funds will be used for high-priority transportation projects that will reduce gridlock and congestion in California communities sooner. Actually, the funding going to highways, also communities and city streets, and intercity rail also. All reducing greenhouse gases. Using cap-and-trade funds for high-speed rail will not accomplish the goal of reducing greenhouse gases by the year 2020. On the contrary, according to the most optimistic estimates, the first phase won't even be operational till 2022, 2 years after the state is required to meet the AB 32's reduction goals. In addition, the legislative analyst states in its 12-13 budget, funding a request for high-speed rail, the project will initially increase greenhouse gases emissions for many years to come. Instead of high-speed rail, we should focus on alleviating vehicle congestion on our roads. Some of you from LA and the San Francisco area know about the congestion problems, and I know Senator Huff mentioned all of those and the studies that were done for people idling on those roads. I know Senator Hertzberg from LA and others who spend time on the 405 or the 5 in congestion times knows the gas emissions are very bad down in that area. We need to alleviate that congestion on our road where cars are idling for hours at a time in gridlock. Providing a steady revenue source to assist in addressing our transportation needs will enable the state to more adequately meet our reduced emissions goals. Transit may work in larger cities like San Francisco and LA. They don't work in the rural communities where I represent and a lot of you represent. There is not public transportation. A lot of that, we have Metrolink up in the Antelope Valley and Santa Clarita Valley to get people, we call it down below, to work. On the San Bernardino side, we don't have that, and they call it down the hill to get to work. And it really, the gas tax increase would put a real burden on our families and really who are trying to get work that can't work in our own communities. They have to commute. So I appreciate, as the Senator Huff has said and all of you have said, we need to come up in this next 2 weeks with some kind of a solution to solve the transportation issues that are going to affect families. It may take 10, 15, 20 years and past my lifetime and some of yours to make that happen. But we need something, not just with a lockbox. And I love what Senator Hertzberg said, you know, go big or go home. My granddaughter uses that often when we're playing games. I'm going to go big or go home. So we have to do that now. It's affecting our families. It's the gas taxes, the additional taxes. We need a source of income that we already have in the budget now with the extra resources we have that are not being directed to transportation or were not discussed as an issue, and that's why we're in this Special Transportation Committee itself. So I won't bore you with any other facts. I think we all need to work together, as we discussed and Senator Cannella discussed, bring all these bills together that deal with the transportation issues before we end session to say, this is what needs to be done for the best resources we can put together to eliminate gas emissions by the 2020 AB 32 deadline that we can take from high-speed rail right now, which the majority of citizens that voted for this project are now saying it's spending too much money. We don't like it. I know there's been efforts to put it back on the ballot, but that high-speed rail does not help in my community right now for keeping people in jobs that commute. And adding extra burden of gas taxes will eliminate jobs and hurt families. And that's not what we're wanting to do in California. It is go big or go home. And this is a way that we can do that. So I appreciate you looking at this as one of the options as you move forward in the next 8 days, or 7 days now, thankfully, and look at that. And I would ask for your help in that and doing that and using maybe this as a vehicle to help in that direction. So with that, I'd take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Senator. We want to hear...
You've answered a lot of questions already.
Yes, I know. And I appreciate your comments. We want to hear speakers in favor of the bill. How about speakers opposing the bill, please? Come forward. I have a few.
Probably the same ones for Huff, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Unfortunately, we have to oppose the senator's bill at this time. I'm here on behalf of Caltrain. Our project in the Bay Area, we are moving to electrify that system. We are directly linked with the high-speed rail train. They will be operating on our infrastructure, and hopefully someday, as they come up into the Bay Area, we are able to operate on their infrastructure and use our commuter service to get further into Valley and elsewhere in Northern California in order to help alleviate some of those commute times that we are seeing on our highways in the region. So with that, unfortunately, we have to oppose the bill.
Other speakers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Dunn on behalf of the Association for California High-Speed Trains. And with respect to the senator, we do appreciate the need to build more transportation infrastructure and improve our congestion. We would just argue that along with the majority of Californians and this legislature that approved the high-speed rail program, that needs to be a part of the component. Continuing to build freeways, the capacity, it's the cost and capacity that would take up as far as land use exceeds that with high-speed rail. We're creating jobs. There are people out building the railroad right now. Just like a road, the railroad gets laid one spike at a time. There's environmental planning that's taking place. So there are a lot of people employed right now working on high-speed rail. It does create jobs. It's going to help us move our most valuable California commodity, which is our people. And we need to have this be a part of our future. And we look forward to continue to work to deliver that project. Thank you.
Other speakers, please.
Good afternoon, Chair and members. Jeannie Ward-Waller with the California Bicycle Coalition. We're also opposed to this measure. There are a lot of other high priority issues that we need to be funding with the remaining GGRF appropriations and the 40%. And we don't think that the CTC should be the authority that decides which projects reduce the most greenhouse gases. Thank you.
Please, others.
Hello, Amanda Eakin with Natural Resources Defense Council, and while we appreciate the strong support for transportation, we similarly feel that taking all of the remaining 40% of the cap and trade funds for this use leaves other uses unfunded, including our vehicle electrification goals, energy efficiency, and of course active transportation, so we respectfully oppose.
Joshua Stark with Transform, also respectfully opposing this bill. Although we appreciate the senator's concerns for wanting to fund projects that reduce greenhouse gases, we recognize that the GGRF is for projects beyond just transportation, and this is coming from a transportation-focused organization. We need to include affordable housing. We need to include also natural resources protections and other ways in order to meet the challenge of climate change in the future. So we respectfully oppose.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Jeremy Smith here on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, also opposed.
Okay. We have questions for Senator. Senator, I noticed there was an amendment that was done in July, and you divided up the money 40% to state highways, 40% to local, between cities and counties, and then 20% to public transit.
Yes.
Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes, and in regards to the goal of the intercity rail and the Bay Area gentleman who spoke opposing that, this would give money to help with that electrifying that will eventually work with high-speed rail. So that's why we put that in. We're including that also in the bill, and look forward to moving some aspect of this forward in helping all of us reach those emission goals by 2020.
Okay. Other questions from Senator? Senator Bates, please.
Senator Bates, thank you. Do we have a representative from the Legislative Analyst's Office here this afternoon?
I don't know if we do.
No. Well, the reason I ask that, I think some of the debate that emanates from, whether high-speed rail is meeting its original mission that was supported by the public is whether it really goes the distance in reducing the greenhouse gas, because it's not, anticipated to be completed within 5 years, and our first goal is 2020. We have conflicting information on whether the high-speed rail actually helps us meet that goal, yet we're going to be committing $2.3 billion or 40% of that annually to the project. Then the question that was also raised by the LAO is whether the high-speed rail actually contributes the construction of it, and we know that's going to go on for 15 years, adds to greenhouse gas. So for us as policymakers to try to navigate the competing information for those who support it, those who question it, and those who oppose it, it's very difficult. And I think that we owe it to the public to understand specifically what is high-speed rail going to do to meet 2020, what it's going to do to meet 2050 goals. And that way, I think we come up with, Senator Bell, some better legislation, better policy direction, rather than having what seem to be endless debates. And I will share information I have, and it's not new news. There's an initiative process underway to submit to the voters. And if they vote to discontinue this, and we've given no direction in terms of what we're doing up here to try to resolve the competing concerns regarding the projections on whether this does what it intends to do, whether it gets completed, that really services the state of California from one end to the other, those are issues that we deserve an answer to, because I will tell you, when I was in the Assembly, I supported this. It was $3.2 billion back in 2000 or 2001, and it grew to $9 billion, and now it's $100 billion. And we don't even see it being completed, perhaps, in our lifetime. So I don't think any one of us want that as our legacy. I think we're all here to represent the people, to be accountable to them, transparent, and hopefully lead them, which I think the governor's trying to do. He says, this is a great thing. Give me time, let it happen. Well, okay, then give us enough information that we can be good, credible witnesses to the public. And you have the LAO that I really put on a pedestal. They're supposed to be objective and our outside, resource to give us good direction. They're raising these issues. I'm not. They are, and they're presenting them to me, and I'm somehow being, thwarted in getting answers to those. It's our responsibility, you guys. So I don't think we should just shut everything down.
Okay, other comments? Senator Ridgway.
Yeah, maybe, Mr. Chairman, it might not be a bad idea. It's like, we got the bicycle folks up here testifying and saying we don't want to spend all the money. Well, what would a bike plan cost that you would do that would be intelligent for California? How do you balance out, what is the GHG reduction of all the A, what are the options? B, what are their GHG options to me? What are the ability to, and two, I look at employment, because jobs are foundational, right? You got to figure that out and create a grid, if you will, and help us understand it, because what ends up happening is it becomes transactional. Who are you on what side? Who's your friend? Who's your this? our job in the legislative branch, it seems to me, is to drill into that information and look and pick the highest and best use married by our vision about where we want the state to go. There's a leadership element to that. And I always balance all of that with jobs in a way that makes sure that we employ people in all of this process. So I stole that line from you. And so I just think it would be a good thing to understand this, because we're looking at all of these things in the blind. And I know there's the political issues with respect to the governor's train and all those kinds of things. And I have made speeches on the floor briefly. I just say this, that, you know, we always have these visionary things that we're never good predictors of the future. We see it at the Hoover Dam. We saw it at the Bridge to Nowhere, which is the Golden Gate Bridge, the first bridge to nowhere. We always have those arguments. But that marries the grid, if you will, of options against jobs on the one side, the core issue of GHGs, and the future vision of where we want the state to go. Then we become better informed in terms of making decisions and all of this stuff. I just share that with you because I think it's just so important, and I don't have that data to make these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think recently I've achieved some data that you're talking about in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and perhaps we can get that to the committee right away. Get that information to you.
That would be great.
You know, it involves like all the different options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One of the things about it, and I've talked to Senator Pavley a lot about this also, is that it's very important that we have apples compared to apples. So you don't have like everybody getting up and claiming greenhouse gas emission numbers. So you have one, you know, kind of more of a scientific oriented body doing the calculations of what the actual greenhouse gas emission reduction would be for particular options. So you want to look at it that way so you can really kind of come to some comparison. And I think, yes, transit fares very well in that. I think energy issues, there's all kinds of different greenhouse gas emission options. So perhaps we can get that to everybody. You can kind of make some decisions on that based on that. I think Senator Runner's correct that the high-speed rail project won't be completed for at least 2 years. The first phase will be completed 2 years after the 2020 approach. But I think we're really looking at a 2030, 2040 timeline for greenhouse gas emissions. And maybe I can ask Senator Pavley could contribute on that. What is the plan that you have for in your legislation for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and how would a project that might take 10 years to do fit into that?
Well, that'll, obviously the current thing is through 2020, but executive orders by Governor Schwarzenegger can extend that to 2050 targets, and the 2050 targets came based on the science. So by 2020, we roll them back, hopefully back to 1990 levels, and we are on track to do just that, focusing on mobile sources, RPS, energy efficiency, primarily cap and trade about 16%, low carbon fuel standard, and some SB 375 transit-oriented development. Fuels are our mobile sources are our #1 source of pollution. So moving forward, we're going to, with the Governor Brown's executive order on the 50% reduction of petroleum and increase of energy efficiency and RPS, we'll be moving forward in a little faster place, because I think we get a sense of urgency now. So all these different agencies are in the room to pay based on how you're reducing emission reductions. So the Energy Commission is very engaged on the appliances and the building standards. ARB is the bookkeeper, you're right, the accountant that quantifies reduction targets so they're measured. You have to be able to measure, you can't just do wishful thinking. And ideally, frankly, you would say which ones are the most cost effective? Where do we reduce the most emissions or not?
Cost per ton eliminated kind of thing?
But there's a whole wide variety of areas that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'll go back to my big thing on alternative fuels. If you're serious about petroleum, biofuels, biomethane, we should be doing all of that, creating the jobs here. So picking strategies are involved. in a process called a scoping plan being adopted every few years and updated, where where are our emissions coming from, and then matching them where the reduction targets should be. That is updated every few years. I think this committee and others should be really engaged in looking at that plan and matching where are the emissions, where are they coming from. Then it's based on all the hearings. You have to come up with cost-effective, technologically feasible reductions that can be
Otherwise,
made.
you're wasting your money, right? You just start spending it on various,
But
like you said, you
by
just
sending
fritter away the money and it's gone, and then you don't.
by sending a target in that market signal, what we're seeing is unbelievable private investment dollars coming to California, over $30 billion since 2006. By extending those market signals further on, we're going to see more of that. So we all have to be engaged in this process, providing oversight, but looking through the scoping plans and making adjustments based on what can reasonably be done in which sector, at which time, based on which technologies are available. When we passed our clean car law, no one knew that hybrids would be on the market. Wasn't even in the factor. We were just looking at changing variable valve timing and air conditioning. So it's moving because the technology is changing so rapidly, and it's amazing. So I think an engaged legislature looking at where we get, how we have priorities, and really engaging in the cap and trade expenditures as a collective body is really incredibly important.
Yeah, I think one of the comments I'll make is that relative to this particular bill and, kind of the high-speed rail, just making a sort of a standalone decision on that, I don't think is the right thing to do. But on the other hand, I think we should push these agencies that are asking us to spend all this money to prove how much and when they're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yep.
I mean, we should prove that we should push them and insist that that be given to us.
And part of the focus now is if you want more emissions reduced sooner than later is looking at short-lived pollutants, things like methane, where you would get really the most bang for your buck. And that means digesters and dealing with landfills, and the list goes on and on. So there are a lot of good programs out there, and all have merit as long as they can meet the legal nexus. But then it's working with the agencies who are building in the criteria. For example, we found out that Fish and Wildlife's criteria was based on reducing greenhouse gas emissions in mountains and meadows. Well, that's fine, except that doesn't really put in a lot of urban areas in that discussion. So I'm saying when these agencies are getting money through the governor in the budget appropriation, it's incumbent upon all of us to say, boy, really, is that the highest priority?
Okay. Other comments, other members? Senator Gaines, please.
Appreciate Senator Pavley's comments, and the other aspect that I would interject is that, what is the cost to the consumer? Okay, so you have these priorities that are potentially in conflict with one another. When you've got an individual that might have to pay more for their gasoline, or the cost of their car may go up as a result of unique technology, and how does that impact our economic demographic in California? So, we've got very high poverty rates in California. We've got, in my opinion, a suffering middle class. And then we're putting a matrix of regulation that equals dollars and cents to our constituents. And that should, in my view, should always be part of the balancing act that we play when we take a look at regulation in California.
Okay. Senator Runner, would you like to close?
Yes, just a couple things. Thank you, Senator Gaines. I agree. I think especially in rural areas like mine and so many others in the Central Valley, they're going to have to pay for gas or whatever they need to get to work. And so it's very difficult to do that. When you're talking about statistics and bringing those through, I think the idling motorists that Senator Huff was talking about need to be included in those statistics, that how much is the idling motorists from not having those additional lanes, the fast tracking, a couple things in California that are different in the Bay Area than LA area, that you can use the HOV lanes during certain hours in San Francisco and the Bay Area during commuter hours, other people can use those lanes. In Southern California, we can't. Actually, the other senator runner did a bill to allow that on the State Highway 14, which is going into Los Angeles. And it made a huge difference in the traffic and the congestion there. But we haven't done that on other parts of the 5, the 405, and others that have HOV lanes to allow that use during essential commuter hours. So there's some things like that. We in Southern California can't go in and out of the HOV lanes. They're double lined. When I drive in the Bay Area, I'm like, there's no double yellow lines here. I can go in and out of that HOV lanes.
Not all of them, but most of them.
And most of them. Why can't we do that in Southern California? I mean, that's for another time to debate, but it always frustrates me because I tend to not obey the law and get in and out of those lanes at times in Southern California, thinking, well, this is legal in
say that.
the Bay Area, but it's not legal down here. That just doesn't make sense. And the 2050 goals are, unfortunately, like most of it will not be here except for maybe Senator McGuire and Allen in 2050 to deal with those issues. So maybe Senator Leyva will be here as well, but, I didn't want to. Let's see, anybody else? Oh, the staff probably will be here, but not the majority of us. So
unless we change that
yes,
law.
we're all going to live forever, except for I think you have a better chance of being alive in 2050 than I do. We do need to look at some of those things, and I will probably introduce some bills next year dealing with those. The HOV lanes that you can come in and out of, the other people can use during those non-commuter hours. It makes a huge difference on the 14 freeway. And now at the interchange that they've done in the 5 and the 14, you're not allowed to use those lanes. So as soon as you are in those lanes, then you have to get out of those lanes because it's not commuter hours. And it just makes, 3 lanes instead of 4 when you're on the 5 freeway. So a lot of those can be addressed hopefully in my next year of Senate and the years beyond there. In transportation, I'll be back if you're all on Transportation Committee. So thank you for looking forward and thinking forward on some of these ideas that we can fix and work together on, and looking and reviewing, especially the LAO and some of the emissions that we see happening. And I appreciate Senator Pavley for talking about the economic value of, having those hybrids and electric vehicles and things that wouldn't have been there probably without AB 32. And it's, my concern right now is the taxpayers in my district can't afford the additional gas taxes, and we need to use the transportation dollars out of the budget or other resources that we have, as opposed to adding additional burdens on our families, especially those that commute. So thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the bill. Senator Bates has made the motion. I appreciate Senator Runner's bill. I think it's a kind of, it just cuts the high-speed rail out. I mean, I think we can't do that in this context, that we should not support the bill. We should not do it in this context. It's not, I think it's for a further discussion, is what I'm saying, not the special session. So I urge a no vote on the bill. So we have a motion in favor of the bill. So if there's no discussion, we'll call the roll, please.
The motion is do pass and refer to the Committee on Appropriations. Bell?
No.
Bell, no. Canella? Allen? Allen, no. Bates? Bates, aye. Berryhill? Gaines? Gaines, aye. Hertzberg? Hertzberg, no. Leyva? Leyva, no. Lou? Lou, no. McGuire? McGuire, no. Mendoza? Pavley? Pavley, no. Wykowski? Wykowski, no.
It's 2-8. We'll leave it on call.
Thank you.
Thank you for the discussion, Senator. Now we come to SB X17. Senator Allen, you want to present your bill? Oh, Senator Allen, would you mind waiting until Senator Hill presents his bill?